Is anything in reference to anything gay banned? Like
Right. And that's no way to like run a society
no,
like never before. What is
Congress
happening right now?
step up.
Like
Like
what are they doing? Negative connotation that he has in our culture, he'll carry that around forever.
forever. Hello everyone. We are back for episode 20. We are washed up in Washington, D.C., and we are here to explain and represent the latest news from a Gen P's perspective so that you do not have to watch the legacy media that your grandparents believed in and defended to the bitter end. As you can see, I do not have it memorized yet still, but I decided that this time I needed to say it. I'm Abby, and this is Colin, and we are back.
Yeah, Abby's doing the intro this week for episode 20, which is an achievement, I would say. Double digits was an achievement, 2-0 is an achievement. We'll just keep it going from here.
I hope that this is one of the episodes that pop off again. Like, I'm really excited for this episode in particular. So, a lot's been happening here in our nation's capital, I'll
I
say.
was just telling Abby, I recently re-listened to episodes like 16 through 19, and I like them a lot. Like we had a good run from 16, 17, 18, and I feel like we can just keep it going. And there's no, like you said, no shortage of stuff happening right now. It's a bit overwhelming, to be honest, and I'm just feeling like complete information overload. We are going to be talking predominantly about the Supreme Court rulings, but really just across the legal world right now, there's a bunch of stuff happening that's all extremely complex and all, could change the course of legal history too.
Yeah, Colin and I have been talking, texting a lot about it since everything's been happening. I think I just was scrolling through our text between mid last week to honestly today, right before we recorded this episode, because honestly, I think that along with this podcast, our texts are a good archive of like
Yeah.
what's been happening because we always are texting about current events and brainstorming ideas for the podcast, and that's something that isn't new, I'd say. We've always texted about current events, like honestly, probably since we've started working together
Yeah,
closely when
for
it
sure.
comes to the news because of the Vista. And even between that period of Vista and Washed Up, where we had nothing to produce content for, we still talked about it because it's just something that I think you need to talk about with other people, especially people our age.
I think that's how we knew like starting a podcast made sense and would actually work and we would actually get to 20 episodes is because it was something we were already doing. Like we were already doing so much of the upfront work. So really like it wasn't even so hard to just hop on a weekly basis and comment on it here. Because we're already researching, we're already following, and so why not, you know?
Colin, I'll actually never forget when you first pitched the idea of the podcast to me. I was in my job in Vegas, working my little temp job with my old internship, and I was sitting during my lunch break texting you about the news, and you said something like, I have a crazy idea. I think that we should start a podcast in the new year. And you even had the name washed up and the general idea. And I said, that is so perfect. And it made me actually start brainstorming ideas during my job. And I had this notebook that I used for my personal life, but also like my work notebook. And I had my personal life notebook open all the time, honestly, in my little cubicle. I would like sketch out little ideas. And then once we first started recording in 2025, it's history from there. Now we're on episode 20.
Yeah, I remember like pitching and talking about starting a podcast was I was just like laughing. I was just cracking up like our exchanges back and forth. Maybe one day we'll read those on this podcast too. But like just coming like brainstorming ideas and premises and branding and like audience and all like it was all making me laugh so much that I was like I just think there's something here. And Washed Up is a funny name because it alludes to obviously like the fact that we're washed up reporters, but now it alludes to the fact we're in Washington, D.C. And also I like to think of it as like the news that's washed up on the shore this week. What are we gonna like talk about now? And so on that front, this week was quite busy. There was a a lot washed up on shore this week with between the Diddy trial. verdict that came down today, and Brian Koberger pleading guilty in the case of the Idaho murders, and then, as I mentioned, the Supreme Court. So, is there anywhere you want to start on those different stories?
Let's go chronological. So we can start
Okay.
with SCOTUS. I visited SCOTUS because of my job, and the very next day, all these decisions were released, and I was like, oh my gosh, I was literally just in that very courtroom. I went to like a courtroom lecture where it honestly just talked about like kind of where everyone sits, the nature of the architecture of the room, how things work, stuff like that. But I just thought it was so crazy that the very next day, like I think 5 or 6 decisions came out. And Colin and I were texting about it, and I told him, I can't believe I was there yesterday.
Yeah, and they were big rulings, and some of them were kind of anticipated, and we'd even touched on them before. Like there was one, they all have national implications, I would say, but one of them we had talked about before was about like censorship in public schools, and
Yes.
in particular, this I think was happening in Montgomery County, Maryland, and it worked its way up to the Supreme Court about can parents opt out their student from content in the classroom that's like centered around LGBT themes, or even not even centered, but just in the periphery of it.
Yes. So the vote was 6-3 that parents can opt out kids out of classes with LGBTQ book characters. And I want to say that this case in particular is the one where I'd say most of our generation is talking about, at least in my experience, what I've been seeing on social media. And kind of the more I'd say like prominent case in sense of pop culture. Um, I actually read the dissent from Sotomayor fully for this particular case because I thought it was really well written. And I also have been seeing a lot of social media posts about making fun of this decision in particular and pulling out the little snippets of um what was provided in terms of like the books that were referenced and stuff like that. Like if you pull up the case itself, there's like pages and pages of these children books in it. And I'll say I'm not a fan of censorship in many cases. In this one I'm not a fan of it as well. I don't think it's good to ban any particular lifestyle, especially something that has been is so common now out and about. Like I think that we were talking a little bit about it in terms of the way that more conservative parents allude to LGBTQ relationships and the wording around it as well.
Oh yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah.
We talked about how obviously like it's people who are LGBT are kind of more on the margins of society, even though increasingly so like are more accepted and it's sort of a lifestyle that people understand now a little bit more. But that isn't necessarily like a given. Just because we've seen momentum in that direction doesn't mean it's necessarily going to stay like that. And there's still a very strong, I would say, maybe not majority, but honestly, like a large percentage of the country that is really not open to that kind of lifestyle, or like let alone their kids having any kind of exposure whatsoever to it. And it's strange because obviously they're going to encounter people in their lives who are LGBT, and it's like you do you want them to, for the first time that they're ever encountering that, to have like no concept or background or understanding, or do you want it to be something that like potentially they've witnessed before, and so it's not like a big I don't know, upset in their life? And I would argue like the reason I'm against censorship is because you want people to have understanding of things, not necessarily be like overly exposed to things, but you want them to be aware of what's out there, whether they like it or not, approve or not, so that they can they can like actually confront reality when they find it, not be overwhelmed by it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally makes sense. I think that there is such an issue when people from a young age are shielded from certain from different groups. I think that shelterment, I don't know if that's a word, sheltering. I think that sheltering creates this sort of naivety that when nurtured is not the best in adults.
Definitely, yeah.
Like I think that I could say, and maybe both of us have experienced this at least in the USD community. USD is a private Catholic school, which I really loved USD so much, but there were definitely certain people where I was like, how did you, why did you, like, how did you make it this far in terms of social interaction? It was almost like you have only interacted with one group their entire life, and that naivety has them acting in a way that isn't the most respectful to other people. And I could totally see that happening with children who are maybe sheltered from, LGBTQ relationships. Like you can't really shelter something like that is so prominent in our culture from students in public schools especially. Like that is crazy to me. I grew up in Catholic school and there were definitely books that were not allowed, but as somebody who's older now, I can semi see that in a sense of like they have free reign over that because they're a private institution. And the books that were banned were like wizardry and stuff because it was against, like the Catholic God or stuff like that. Um, but I don't really see that same translation over in public schools. Especially I think about like kids with, I don't know, gay parents or, gay family members, and if they want to talk about their little guardians, like is that another reason to like pull their students out of class? I don't know, like the teacher's not really allowed to explain it.
Right, yeah. I mean, I definitely feel for those kids in that situation whose parents are same sex because they probably whether they understand the nuances and complexities of like this court decision, probably not, but like they're gonna have to live out the ramifications of it either way. That being said, I am not a fan of like overcompensating, and I think this court decision is an overcompensation to an overcompensation. And so, like, I would say,
Explain more,
okay,
please.
I haven't like so I know you sent me like the screenshots of one of the appendixes and maybe Sotomayor's
Yeah,
dissent to this decision, and it was like a page out of the book.
I'll put it right here.
It was a page out of the
The
book,
screenshot.
um, where the book in question, this girl is like asking about her uncle getting married, and she's kind of like jealous that he's not going to be around as much because he has a husband now, and yada yada. And I think like it seems to me there's nothing inherently wrong with it and like writing it into books, but do you have the exact quote from that page?
Yes.
It says, Mummy said, Chloe, I don't understand. Why is Uncle Bobby getting married? Bobby and Jamie love each other, said Mommy. When grown-up people love each other that much, sometimes they get married. And it has like a picture of a heterosexual maybe couple and then two men who I guess are Bobby and Jamie. And so like there's nothing on its face wrong about that, but I do think it's kind of strange to like that book clearly has no real like plot. It's not like artistic. It's just like this weird explainer. And I'm like, I would never read that to my kids, just not because it's LGBT, but because I don't think it's interesting. Like, it's like, why would you invest money in like creating this product that is so like kind of like basic? And to me, that's not how you combat like anti-LGBT hatred. You combat it by actually teaching them about like human nature and underlying dynamics about like what does it mean to be a human. And I just think that that book seems so banal that it's kind of insulting on that on that front. But I don't think it should be banned.
Yeah.
I don't think we should ban stuff, but like we should be reading our kids better stories than that. And to me, like if I was gonna read my kids something, it would not be that. It would be like mythology or folklore. Like I remember my dad used to read to us like different mythology and like even like Bible stories for children that are kind of like not more dumbed down or anything, but just like on a level that children can understand. I think you can meet children on that level without dumbing it down, and that's what I would read to my kids and not something necessarily like that. But I think the court now overcorrecting and saying like, well, because they're pushing this, we need to now like lash back and allow people to opt out or like even not it hasn't happened yet, but take it a step further and start censoring. I don't agree with that at all. Just my 2 cents though.
Yeah, I think that. this book in particular, the passage that you read, like you were saying, like on its face, like I didn't read the full book or anything like that, but from my understanding, it's a book about this girl being jealous of her uncle spending less time with her, not at all about him being LGBTQ at all.
Right.
And just the pure mention of the fact that he's LGBTQ means that this book is now viable to be banned. And I think that that's so stupid. Like there's
So yeah,
literally like
totally.
you can't shield your child or anyone in this day and age from all things considered LGBTQ. You know what I'm saying? Like
Yeah.
that is the part that where I'm like, what? Like there there should be restrictions on children, which we're gonna get to in terms of like like
Online content,
yes,
maybe?
online content like porn and stuff like that. Like I don't think that it's anything that is not age appropriate should not be for children. Like I don't think that we should be having like kids read books about sex or anything when they're like 10 or younger, you know? But I don't think that this has anything inherently to do with, you know, sexual relation at all, and except for the fact that like marriage is something that humans do.
Right.
But I do agree with you that it is an overcorrection.
Yeah. I mean, this is going to continue to be a debate for sure. I see why it gets so complicated and why it's so contentious because when people feel like their kids are at stake or on the line or something like this, I get why people get angry about it. And I see like one person's line is different than another person's line, and there's no like quote unquote right answer. There's no like one size fits all. So my preference would be for the courts to kind of stay out of these kinds of arguments altogether and allow like local schools and districts and states to kind of decide these things. But yeah, I mean as we've been talking about, the Supreme Court handed down its decision. People can opt out. And was it on the religious basis that's okay? Yeah.
So I have like Sotomayor's dissent, a screenshot of a quote that I actually sent to Colin that I really agreed with, and she said, "Yet for public schools to function, it is inescapable that some students will be exposed to ideas and concepts that their parents may find objectionable on religious grounds." And that quote, like I totally agree with. Like, how can you X out every single thing that may be against their religion? You know, like it's not just books. Like there are some religions where like I don't know, you're not allowed to do certain dress a certain way. What if somebody else public school where you're not allowed to really police dress code in the way that private schools are, sees that you're exposed to that anyway. Like it seems impossible to me to accommodate to every single religion and in every single aspect in that way. So I
Right.
don't understand like with books like why this has to be the same way, especially when it's not an outright book about LGBTQ people, you know? It's
Right.
just a mention of
No,
it.
I completely agree with everything you just said. And I would say, like, even though I've been kind of railing against this one particular book as kind of a bad example, um, for like high school level, I don't even think it is a problem to have books that are centered on LGBT themes in their school library.
I don't
Like,
either.
when I was 17, I read Call Me by Your Name. I think that's a great book, just in general. It's like about a love story. Yes, it's about two gay people having a relationship, and it's kind of that's central to the story. Like the plot is really about their relationship and how it progresses and all this, and like I just like and appreciate that as a story, and that I think has a place in a high school library. It's age appropriate. There's not really anything like pornographic about it. So like on that on that level, I don't think we should be shielding kids from stuff, even though on the lower levels, yeah, does have to be that conversation more.
And is it a shielding of all things of mention of LGBTQ or of anything of the sort? Because I know books that talk about LGBTQ people badly. Like, is that banned too? Like, I haven't really looked into that, but for example, I read Dante's Inferno in high school, and I think one of the circle, not I think, I know one of the circles of hell is one of the worst ones. It's you're there for sodomy, and it's like one of the circles of hell that's described where all these quote sodomizers are being punished. Um, in one of the worst ways. I can't remember the punishment, but I know that it was like quoted as like one of the worst kind of sinners. So is that banned too now? Like, is anything in reference to anything gay banned? Like
Right. And that's no way to like run a society. You can't just like stamp out ideas because you don't like them. I think the more you try to do that, the more that these ideas just go underground and they have other like worse manifestations that way, as opposed to, we talk on this show time and time again, like open dialogue and conversation is kind of the best solution for like airing stuff out, letting things breathe and like coming to a consensus. But if you are just stamping out things because you don't like them, we go nowhere as a society. It just kind of festers in the worst possible way.
yeah, and in talking about censorship, we are going to pivot to
Sure, yeah.
another censorship case, which is that the Supreme Court sided with Texas's age verification law for porn sites, which it's funny because we also discussed this, and I think that for this, I am on the more conservative side when it comes to it. I think it was another, what, 6-3 decision? Yes. And the court said agreed with Texas saying that the law only incidentally burdens the protected speech of adults, which I have to agree with. Like, I think that there should be limits to what children, not people, children, underage people are seeing online when it comes to pornographic content.
Yeah, I really cannot like pick a definitive side on this other than that I can tell you like what a libertarian perspective believes, and I, as someone who identifies as more libertarian, can tell you like I can represent it to you, but I might not necessarily fully agree with it. But a libertarian would say that you have the right to free expression and free speech under the First Amendment, and so anything that curtails that is a violation of your First Amendment rights. And they see, I guess, like if you're seeking out that kind of content, it's a manifestation of that right. And so on that basis, you should be allowed to access whatever content you want without having to verify age. Is that kind of accurate?
To libertarians' perspective, or to you're saying,
Is that how you understand it?
yeah, yeah, I think that to me, I don't know, like I definitely do think that there needs to be age verifications on things like this because but mostly because I think that maybe this is just a personal preference, but I think that a lot of pornographic content is ruining a lot of young people.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that for sure.
Yeah, and I in a hot take, I don't think that it's very maybe this is straight disagreeing with new age feminism, but I don't think it's very feminist to sell your body in that way in particular. And I think there should be laws against that as well. Um, but I find it hard to talk about video and, images as free speech in general. I know we
Yep.
talked about this. What's your perspective on
That's
it?
sort of
Because like
that's
we
like,
talk about free
yeah.
speech a lot being like such writers for it, like RIDER, like because like yeah, you guys know our spiel. So it feels wrong of me to be like, okay, yeah, here's the exception, but I don't even know if I think that images are free speech.
Right. No, that was sort of when we were talking about it, that was the level of analysis that I was really able to offer because I don't have a super strong stance on this ruling. But I can tell you that I don't think images and words are quite equivalent. There's like same idea but different execution, I think. Both of them are a form of expression. Like you could bring a sign to protest, for instance, that has like an image on it and you don't even need any words, it can convey a message. So both of them are sort of forms of communication and forms of expression. If someone is like creating pornographic content because they're like that kind of creator and they're making a living off of it or something like this, like that you could argue is a form of expression, but it doesn't seem to me like the same as like a writer who is producing written content and like there's just so much more that goes into the process of writing and delivering a message that way that is not required to produce images, and like the producing of the images can be kind of like mindless process, but to produce a coherent narrative takes actual effort and discipline and like your own energy put into it. So I don't know. I'm not willing to like definitively make any claims about whether or not there's a difference between images and words, but to me there seems like a qualitative difference there that this ruling doesn't quite get at. I'd like there to be a little bit more like nuanced conversation about what that difference might be. And if there is a difference, in fact, between words and images, does that do you have the same protections around both in that case?
I think not. I think not. I think that for me, like I probably have the same understanding and opinion as you when it comes to that. I mean, we could talk forever about like free speech and like the First Amendment and stuff like that, but I agree with you that like I don't really know how to differentiate the two in a way that makes the most sense to me in a way that I think it should be looked at because I haven't figured it out. Like I think that images and video is something else entirely because at that point, if images and video are free speech, can actions also be considered free speech? Like I think there's this like blurry line when it comes to things like that and what SCOTUS decides as groups like that because it's the same way I feel about when they rule things like corporations as people. Like I don't consider corporations having the same rights as people, as individuals.
Yeah, like I think we're both saying we would like a little bit more distinction
Hmm.
between these different categories, and the difference between the categories may make the ultimate difference in whether or not they should be treated differently, like words and images, or it might not make the ultimate difference. But like that's what I think the conversation should be centered around, and I don't think that necessarily is what the decision was about. It was more about they weren't really having, in my interpretation, that kind of analysis
Yeah,
trying to
no.
differentiate. It was more just like we're gonna assume that images are the same as free speech and then rule that way.
And the court loves to do stuff like that because it's much easier for them, I'll say. Is there another specific court decision that you feel particularly passionate
Um,
about talking about
we could
next?
like touch on, I would say the one about the injunctions. There's
Hmm.
I think a end to a nationwide injunction. So basically that just means that like a court case that is decided in one jurisdiction does not then apply to the rest of the nation. If it's like a groundbreaking ruling, in the past they've been able to issue this injunction that would then apply to other jurisdictions. Um, but the Supreme Court is saying no, actually, you have to sue on the merits of the individual case, and then that will work its way up, and the jurisdiction can make their ruling on the merits of the case that's before them. And if that is appealed over and over, then eventually it will make its way up to the Supreme Court, and they're the ones who will rule on whether or not it applies nationwide. And that's the Supreme Court oversees again all the entire judiciary. So I think I'm a fan of this ruling. I think that's going to end nationwide injunctions because I think it is more closely aligned with how the founders envisioned all of this working, like where the Supreme Court would have the ultimate say to create the precedent or like the yeah, to create
Yeah,
precedent.
precedent.
And that's not really up to the lower courts to do. And if there's disagreements about what the right ruling is, then there's the whole appeals process, and that's why it exists.
Yeah.
So a lot of the nationwide injunctions have been used to block Trump executive orders mostly before they can make their way up to the Supreme Court. And now the Supreme Court is saying, no, if you want to block those, it's going to have to make its way all the way up to us first. And I think I'm okay with that.
I mean, I think that I'm okay with it too, in that I think we both have the same understanding of, government and rulings and lawmaking is the most efficient at the smallest level. So to me, yeah, that does make the most sense to do something like that where it's supposed to go up uh down up, not the opposite way.
I'm just a big fan of anything that kind of makes cases more about the merits of the case rather than the argument, like the political argument.
Ideology about it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because I think anytime you have a case that's kind of rooted in political ideology or a decision, especially at the Supreme Court level, it's bound to get overturned down the line. And I would really like for our court cases to have more staying power so that we're not in like this constant legal whiplash. And one way of doing that would be to get rid of these nationwide injunctions and allow for the appeals process to happen more, I guess, spontaneously, naturally, and giving that authority back to the Supreme Court to have the ultimate say.
What do you think about the way that it's impacting some of Trump's EOs?
Well, for now, it's kind of a victory for Trump because his executive orders that were being blocked by lower level courts are now allowed to kind of play themselves out. So the big one that this case was ancillary to was the issue of birthright citizenship. And so there still hasn't been a definitive ruling about birthright citizenship, as far as I understand. This
Hmm.
was more just a ruling about the process by which they were trying to reaffirm birthright citizenship.
Yeah.
And so for now, it's going to shake out in some interesting ways where some states are going to be operating in one way with respect to the idea of birthright citizenship, and other states are going to be operating in a different way. And there's going to have to be a court case brought that lays all of this out, and it's going to have to be appealed again over
And
and
then
over. Yep.
climb up the ladder.
So really, the Supreme Court just kicked this issue of birthright citizenship back
Back
down to the
to
back down to the lower courts, and now it's like saying you got to climb your way back up, and then we'll rule on that issue when that's what's brought before us.
And I see in the near future that that is exactly what is going to happen.
Yeah, I think it will too. So,
Yeah.
but in the meantime, there's going to be a whole lot of like
There's
scrambling,
standstills.
and
Yeah.
I don't like that, but I think that's kind of how the system was meant to function, to avoid giving any one like local judge too much authority, because I
Hmm.
don't think that that's how the system was designed.
And then that way there will be a precedent assigned for, future cases like this.
Okay, so on this case with the birthright citizenship non-ruling, essentially when they were trying to argue about whether or not Trump's executive orders could stand, irrespective of the lower court's injunction against them, ACB and some other, I think six other justices said that no, the lower courts do not have the power to block uh, Trump's EOs. And some of the other more liberal justices, like Ketanji Brown Jackson, were saying that yes, they should. The nationwide injunction should stand. And ACB kind of came back swinging at Ketanji Brown Jackson by saying that, in essence, she was advocating for an all-powerful judiciary or like lower justices or judges, sorry, who could make decisions that had nationwide implications, and that was ironic because Ketanji Brown Jackson's concerns about Trump behaving in a unilateral, authoritarian, or dictatorial manner would just be handed over to lower court judges, and that's no solution either. So that's why the conservatives were not in fan of this nationwide injunction thing that keeps happening, and that's why I think they ruled what they ruled because they don't want too much power concentrated in either place in the presidency or the lower judges.
Yeah, okay. I really like Justice Jackson, but I do agree that like there should definitely not be too much power in any sort of, branch of government. I feel like I'd be a hypocrite to not say that when I always talk about how the executive power nowadays is, way too many EOs are happening, way too much power there, and our recent reel that went semi-viral, which I'm sure we'll talk about a little bit too, and how we were reminding our washed up viewers of who has the power to declare war and stuff like that. So I think that yeah, I will say that I think I'm also more conservative when it comes to this ruling as well. And I do think what I said earlier stands, like it's gonna be kicked back up to the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
And I'm hoping then that when it comes to birthright citizenship that I will definitely be on the more left-leaning side for when
Yeah,
it comes to
totally.
that. Like
I hope
I'm
they'll
fine.
affirm it
Yeah,
on the
exactly. Like,
basis of the 14th Amendment, which
yeah,
ex almost explicitly gives birthright citizenship. So like
exactly
it
that.
should be a no-brainer. Let's not overcomplicate it. Let's just wait for it to make its way back up and they'll
Yeah.
decide. And also to your point about which branch needs to take back or give up some power, I think Congress needs to step up
No,
like
Congress.
never before. Like what is
Congress
happening
needs
right
to
now?
step up.
Like
Like,
what are they doing? Like okay, not only the issue of the war, which is one issue, that's a big one, but now we have the big beautiful bill that just passed the Senate after having already passed the House and looks like it's going back to the House, and if the House passes it, then it becomes a law. And like Congress is just kicking all of its power over to President Trump, and that is where I think we're having this massive imbalance. It's not so much SCOTUS, which like, or the lower judges, which like, yeah, they can be sometimes heavy-handed or sometimes a little meekish, but like, it's really Congress that is, in my view, not stepping up right now and creating this imbalance between the three branches.
yeah, it's funny because I think the other day I was just talking to somebody and I made a joke and I was like, "Where's Congress nowadays?" Like nothing. Like, why does it feel like they're like the forgotten middle
It
child
feels
or
like they're
something?
just all taking like direct orders from President Trump, except for maybe three Republican senators, maybe four. And everyone else is just kind of falling along partisan lines, especially the Republicans,
I hate
who,
that.
under the leadership of Thune and Mike Johnson, are basically just doing exactly what Trump wants them to do. I think it's disgusting. That's not how it was meant. That's not how the system was really set up. I mean, it is how the system was set up, but like
But this
Congress should
isn't,
be an equal
yeah,
partner in that, not just taking orders from another branch.
federalism, baby.
Yeah.
Um,
Checks and balances
checks and
too.
balances, federalism, state and federal.
Yeah, so any other Supreme Court rulings you want to get into? I think those are the
Those were the
main
main
ones
ones. We
that we
could
really
t
brought
sit
up.
here and talk about SCOTUS for hours, but I mean, we said a while ago that we were only going to talk about the things that we want to talk about, and I think I'm good with
I
SCOTUS.
think so, yeah. So some other legal news, we can maybe touch on basically Diddy, the verdict came down today in his trial, which has been going on for I think over 8 weeks now. It's been a long trial, a lot of testimony. They were trying to get him on RICO charges, which is like essentially racketeering or engaging
Yeah.
in like gang related activity. And so you had to have a certain number of predicate charges of felonies that you could then like layer on top of one another to qualify for this RICO charge. And basically, he got off on the RICO and a lot of the bigger charges that were being leveled against him, but instead was found guilty for the soliciting a prostitute,
Prostitution.
which is a crime, but it's not like as severe as if he had been found guilty of some of these other charges. So everyone is basically saying like Diddy and the defense team, this could be considered a win for them. And I don't know how do you feel about it? We've kind of avoided talking about Diddy.
I feel, yeah, I don't think have we talked about Diddy at all?
No, not really.
I I mean, I think he should have been found guilty for much more than this. And when it was dropped, I remember it was literally this morning. What's the date today? July 2nd. I should know that. Um, it was dropped, and I remember me and a couple other people around me, we were talking about it, and we were like, our jaws were on the floor. Um, but am I surprised? Kind of not really. There's a lot of conspiracy around, Diddy and Hollywood and everything that has to do with the dark side of Hollywood. And so many people were like, he was either gonna die or he was gonna not be found guilty for a lot of things, or else that he would bring the entire ring of Hollywood down. Which not to sound conspiracy like, I kind of agree with.
Yeah, I mean it's interesting. There's certainly people have compared it to like Jeffrey Epstein, just in terms of the way that his network was set up, and it's like these are very high profile people being charged with very serious crimes, and so like when they go falling, people in their network are very implicated, and that's why the Diddy case has been so big since like really 2024. And so that's why it's like a huge deal for this verdict to come out. And he's gonna probably be facing some prison time, but it's not gonna be necessarily like a life sentence. Whereas if he had gotten the worst of the worst, like the book thrown at him, then he would have probably been in for life. So this ruling does matter, and it does have implications for, oh my God, so much. I think it has implications for the culture, for the way that women are treated. Also, he was not being charged with domestic violence, but there was a pretty clear case to make that he had engaged in domestic violence. There was video evidence of him beating his ex, Cassie, and he wasn't able to be charged for that because there's a statute of limitations of 1 year for like assault and battery in a relationship or something along those lines. So he wasn't being charged with domestic violence, but there's pretty irrefutable evidence that he did engage in that. So for him to now get a pass on some of the more grave charges against him, it's like it's not necessarily excusing that behavior, but it kind of feels, I think people on like a visceral level are feeling that a little bit. Like he got away with potentially like things he could have been charged for, and there could have been justice if he had been held to a higher account.
I certainly feel that way. I think that we were kind of talking about like the effects that like Diddy has on our generation. And I honestly think the only effects that he has on maybe younger, mid to young, no, like younger aged adults right now is his impact on Justin Bieber plus this trial in particular. Like
Right.
a lot of people didn't really look up to Diddy in the way that maybe teenagers in the early 2000s did, I'd say. Like I mean, I didn't really know the big like what everything he was known for in terms of, his reputation back then until the case came out and everyone was like, well, of course, like he was always doing these parties and he was always doing this and he was always doing that and I was like, I mean, I was a kid back then. Like I didn't
Yeah. I think
really know.
millennials had a bigger awareness of who Diddy was and like what he represented to the music scene in Hollywood. But I agree, like I did not have a sense of who he was. The only thing I knew him from was Kesha's song TikTok,
Yeah,
Wake Up in the Morning, Feel My
like P.
Diddy.
Diddy.
And then the first time he entered my awareness was after his house was raided by the FBI. There was Coachella and Kesha performed TikTok and she changed the lyric
What is it? To feel
to,
P. Diddy?
yeah,
Yeah.
wake up in the morning saying FP Diddy. And I remember that was the first time it like registered with me,
Was that
like,
the
oh,
performance you were there for?
yes, I
Okay.
was there, and then I had to write it into an article. So I was like, wait, something's going on here. But before that, I didn't really care about Diddy, didn't really know even who he was. So this case didn't have that same gravitas to me as others.
I think I would say people our age feel that way. I mean, maybe there are a few people who know a little bit more about him in a pop culture sense, but for me, it was easier to keep up with this case in a sense of or not keep up with because I don't think that I've been diligently keeping up with it as much as I maybe did with other pop culture cases, but it was just easier for me to think to myself, no, I don't like this guy slash didn't let any nostalgia in or anything like that, especially because I think people like, Justin Bieber was more of like our childhood circle and seeing what's been happening to him and, the allegations with Diddy against or Diddy and him and everything that goes on in that realm, I think is something that our generation talked a lot about.
Yeah, I mean, just I guess taking it a little more specific, there's a lot of videos circulating right now of Justin Bieber kind of being like on the precipice of, seems to me like a little bit of a psychotic break. And obviously, I'm not any kind of medical expert, but like he's just kind of behaving incoherently and a little erratically. And there's like this clip going around right now of him saying, it's not clocking to you that I'm standing on business. And I've been hearing that over and over, like in my circle in Gen Z, and people quoting it as kind of like a meme, which is really sad because I think this is someone who's definitely struggling a lot right now. And
Oh, he totally
it's
is.
very, very sad. And unfortunately, my pure speculation is that it does kind of trace back to something having to do with Diddy because there was video that emerged after Diddy was arrested and whatnot of Justin Bieber really, really young hanging out with Diddy and Diddy making comments about how like, oh, Justin's with me for the next so many hours. And
Did he not like stay with him overnight
yeah,
or
there was certainly a connection there because I think Usher was very close with Diddy and Usher has helped bring
Justin Bieber?
right. So there's certainly like this part of the network of Diddy. Justin Bieber is definitely one of the people implicated in it, arguably one of the more innocent ones because he was so young when he got brought into this fold. And now to see him struggling so badly, I think you can only ask, like, is it connected perhaps? But
Yeah, I saw a lot about, the connections between Diddy, Usher, Bieber in the early stages of Diddy um being accused of everything that he was accused of. I think going back to what you were saying about Justin Bieber is and that quote, like I've seen it literally everywhere. I think definitely if you're in our age range and on social media, you've seen it. And he doesn't look very well, and it's really scaring me because I I fear that like Hollywood does this a lot to especially young people who are younger in fame. Um, and then once something really bad happens, they're like, "Oh my gosh, like I can't believe we didn't see the signs." And it's like, no, the signs were actually all there. It was ridiculously red and blaring actually. And it's on its face, yeah, like funny that he's saying all this, but I actually do really hope that he gets the help he needs because I mean, it's not right that he has paparazzi after him at all times. I also think paparazzi is not a form of journalism at all, and I don't respect them very much. And so yeah, I don't like that at all, but I can tell that something go is going on that's much deeper, especially with, there's also some gossip about I don't even want to talk about it, like just like Hailey Bieber and stuff like that, and how she has been kind of distant. She didn't post about him on Father's Day or anything like that. And it just I just hope all is well in that realm. For Hailey Bieber, Justin Bieber, their mental state, their child's mental state. I hope that whatever he went through, God forbid, I hope that he breaks the cycle with his kid.
yeah, and I think like that's to bring it home. I think that's why people are so upset, perhaps, about this Diddy verdict, where it's not even necessarily it was a miscarriage of justice or anything, because the jury is going to decide how the jury decides, and that's how the legal system works. And you know, pending any kind of argument otherwise, I think people feel like yeah, the jury can decide how they're going to decide, but how or when did he have to answer for like the cultural damage that was done potentially with these other stars that he really influenced and hurt and these other people in his sphere that he influenced and hurt and kind of was able to continue to do whether he was breaking the law or not he was having a negative impact on people around
Hmm.
him and where does he have to answer for that if not in the court with the charges that were brought against him will there ever be an opportunity for that kind of like uh, I don't know, reconciling as a culture? Seems to me like it's now being left pretty open-ended, unfortunately.
Something that I know is that Gen Z will not let him get away with that shit.
Oh
Like,
no.
I just know it. I know it. I know it.
Yeah, I agree. I wasn't interested in him before and I'm still not. So like anything he tries to do to make a comeback, like I don't
Like,
he's
F
he's deemed
that.
irrelevant. He's completely besides obviously now the char like the negative connotation that he has in our culture, he'll carry that around forever.
Forever.
But as far as us like investing in any creative projects, like no.
No, I'm sure that's every narcissist famous man's worst
It was
nightmare.
the same thing with R. Kelly, honestly.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so wrapping up this episode with the guilty plea by Brian Koberger, which also happened today. So it's a huge day with that happening and the Diddy verdict coming down. And basically, Koberger was brought before the court. He said he was asked, did you commit these murders on these days? And he said yes. And this was expected. This was the news came out. I think it was on Sunday that he was expected to plead guilty. Instead of going to trial and having this sort of long drawn out, like prosecution, defense come at each other with witnesses and this prolonged uh, reliving of everything that happened. This is sort of a much simpler, quicker way of justice, I would say, but also causing controversy because some people feel that the trial would have been important and necessary in a way to kind of come to terms with all that Koberger is now admitting to have done. And I don't know, what do you feel about all that?
I think that again, like what you were saying earlier, I felt like a very big information overload at first, but yeah, I haven't gotten the chance to like fully look at everything, but I think that I'm not surprised that he pled guilty at all. Do I think that anyone should be given death penalty? I have to say no, but maybe that's a controversial opinion when it comes to stuff like that. We were just talking to about the families of victims and how maybe differently I would feel if I was a family member of a victim. So it's hard for me to say, but I I I'm not surprised at all that he pled guilty, and I I struggle to this case always brings me down because I always struggle to think about like these college age students being killed, and at the time, like, we've been covering this case since the very beginning.
Yeah,
Like, we were what, like,
November of 22 was we wrote an article, or our friend did for our paper.
yeah, so we were like 20 when that happened, and now it's literally 3 years later where we're full grown out of school, and it's just hard.
Yeah, I mean, to me, I agree. It's not really a surprise that he is now admitting that he did it because the evidence against him, pointed in that direction from the beginning. There really wasn't a doubt in my mind that he was the one who murdered those four students, and they're saying he's pleading guilty now as a way of avoiding the death penalty because if this had gone to trial, it would have been on the table. And so now he's avoiding that possibility. He's probably going to get life in prison, I'm sure. And,
Surely.
and so he'll spend the rest of his life in jail. And is that justice, or would the death penalty have been justice? I agree with you that the death penalty is a horrific thing, and we've talked about that on a previous episode of this show. And I completely agree that there's really no situation where I would be in favor of the death penalty. And also, I can recognize that, like, if there was to be a death penalty, like, this would be a good case for that to be the punishment. Again, I'm not saying I think you should have gotten that penalty, but I can also recognize, like, on a sliding scale of severity of heinous acts,
Like,
this would be up there
yeah.
for sure. And
Like, it would be a case considered for the death penalty as somebody who has nuance and could also admit, like, that they are very anti-death penalty, but also can see the severity of how the case is and how that would fall under that umbrella.
yeah, and it touches on like a similar thing to the Diddy trial where it feels like there's something that's like left out there and not really resolved, which again is kind of like the cultural impact that this will have. We've talked a little bit about the legal implications of both cases and all of the SCOTUS cases, and like the whole legal world right now is kind of, again,
In
information
shambles.
overload. But like, what about the cultural impact of, and like, seeing him get life in prison as opposed to the death penalty? Are other people perhaps going to feel emboldened to be violent or think that they can
That's a
get
really
it
good point.
think that they can get away with things like whether that be domestic violence, whether that be as far as murder. It's like we don't want to give people passes about these kinds of things. And I'm not saying that that's what happened in Diddy or Koberger, but like we have to be very mindful too, not just about the legal implications of these decisions or these verdicts, but cultural ones too.
I think that the cultural impact that I remember happening when the Idaho murders like first broke the news. I remember everyone was talking about it in terms of maybe it was just the nature of our age at the time. And everyone was talking about it because we even like knew people from that town who were like, yeah, like I'm connected to this person because of this. And I think that anything with, like children, young adult, honestly, more so young adults who have the media literacy to like look at things and have their social media flooded with things, like it's really easy to forget how invincible people are or invincible. Yeah, to forget that they're not invincible is what I'm saying. And I remember that being a very big topic of discussion when this case came out in terms of danger could really come from anywhere. Like that was such a normal night. Like I didn't see anything wrong with their night at all. Like college kids go out, they do things. They never like I never went out in college thinking to myself like, "Oh, this guy's like following me. This guy's trailing me."
I think if there had been a trial, we might have uncovered a little bit more about like why did he target those people?
Yeah.
Was it really completely random and senseless as it seems? And I'm sure like obviously it was random and senseless, but like we would have as a public been able to kind of contend with the maybe the motive a little bit more or like maybe the backstory and not that that would have like explained anything because it is so hard to grapple and understand this situation. But I do think like having a little more information might have been in the public's best interest here.
Hmm.
So for him to plead guilty and just be sent potentially to jail for the rest of his life, it's justice in one sense, but that's why I feel there's a little bit left to be uncovered about that story that would be in the public's best interest. And I think some of the families of the victims agree with that, and some of them vehemently do not agree with that and are glad that he pled guilty. So it really just comes down to like a matter of your opinion
Yeah.
and where you stand on this. Even within the people affected the most by this case, there's disagreement about what would be justice here.
Yeah. I and I am really interested to see like how this is going to impact, like you said, like what, like I didn't even think about that point of like, oh, in the future, like are other cases going to be similar where some people feel very strongly about it and think to themselves like, oh no, this should have gone to trial. Like this other alternative punishment that we are both against should have be at least an option on the table type of thing. Like which I disagree with, but can also recognize that that severe punishment maybe is sometimes the only thing stopping people from committing heinous crimes. The
Right.
idea of dying.
It's hard to put yourself in those shoes because it's kind of an insane like point of view, but the death penalty being an actual deterrent from some unhinged people going off and committing murders because that's like the one thing keeping them in check is they don't want to die themselves. Like it's a very flimsy kind of like preventative measure or deterrent, but it might there's an argument for it as the death penalty as a deterrent that I don't think we can completely disregard, no matter how much we find the death penalty to be a bit barbaric and
Barbaric.
abhorrent.
So I was gonna say a barbaric, yeah.
Okay, real quick, I'm gonna do a quick bury the lead, 2.5 minutes about ranked choice voting because this is something that is really, really relevant right now. I'm sure everyone is watching Zoran Mamdani beat Andrew Cuomo for the nomination of Democratic mayor in New York City. And, Andrew Cuomo, former governor, kind of disgraced, had to resign because of allegations against him with sexual harassment and whatnot. And so he's making a comeback, trying to run for Democrat mayor. And then instead, Zoran Mandamini, who's like this early 30s New York lawmaker of some kind, he kind of comes out of the weeds and beats Cuomo. And it's like this crazy upset. And everyone's talking about it. And recently I've been studying this thing called ranked choice voting, which kind of it was at play here. It might not have changed the outcome, but I think it's really interesting in what it offers because we talk a lot about divisive elections and how you have two entrenched sides that are very, very partisan, trying to sway more voters to their side. And so it creates this like polarization effect that's obviously very toxic. We've seen it have really damaging consequences again for the culture whenever we have a presidential election or like national elections. And ranked choice voting is where you pick your top candidate and then up to like five candidates after that. So you
Hmm.
can pick your top five favorite and rank them in order of preference. And if no one wins outright, like if no one wins 50% of the vote, then they'll take away the lower scoring candidates and take their votes and divvy them up to the other candidates until a clear winner emerges. So it's sort of a novel system of elections that was used in this New York City primary, and it's getting a lot of attention because it was at play here. And I just think it's a very interesting concept as opposed to the most divisive candidate winning. It forces the candidate to build a broader coalition so that yes, they're going to get the number one vote from the people who support them, but then they're also going to get the other parties like second, third, fourth option votes. So it just creates this. It requires people to build coalitions instead of further digging into their entrenched beliefs, and so I think it could be a positive outcome.
Amazing.
Thanks.
That was a really good 2.5 minutes. I was a poli sci major in college, and we learned a lot about like the different types of voting styles. And I actually particularly remember going to um a required event for one of I'm literally forgetting what happened at USD, but like we had to go to these events to get certain points for certain things to graduate. That sounds so
It
vague,
was the
but
bane of our existence.
yeah, it's like what is it called? Like
The
compass.
compass.
Yes. I was like, why did I go to this again? Not because it would actually ended up being very interesting, but I went to this like poli sci department hosted event which offered like compass points. I don't even want to get into it. But one of the lectures was about this professional on ranked choice voting and the benefits of ranked choice voting. So I thought that was really interesting that you brought that up because I actually have always thought to myself that I would be a fan of it, but unfortunately, like in our um political system, like ranked choice voting wouldn't really work with like our two-party system right now. So maybe, yeah, like at a state level that it would be better for certain candidates. I always think when I'm researching my local candidates that I wish that I could put different votes into different pots.
Yeah.
I actually do wish that for federal too, but it like I think it would a ranked choice voting system would work a lot better in terms of people who run on independent campaigns. I'll say
Oh,
that
yeah,
for
yeah.
sure.
And that's why I think it's really exciting. There's a couple of states who have tried it out. Alaska tried it. Was it Nevada or Nebraska who tried it? One of them
Think
did.
Nevada did.
It's probably Nebraska then. I know Maine has tried it. Maryland introduced a bill that would implement ranked choice voting for presidential primaries. And so that could be interesting. Like if you want your candidate to have a better shot, but you're not really like super ultra Republican or ultra Democrat, like you could have it would create this opportunity where the less partisan candidates could kind of rise to the top. And I think people who watch this show will understand why that appeals to us because we're all about like less divisiveness and more dialogue, you can say, or like more um openness to independent perspectives and very pro candidates that are and I think this is not just us, this is also Gen Z who like is so sick of the two-party system and the way that it just drives escalation of um, what people already believe, not new ideas that are actually beneficial for everyone.
just a regenerative think tank. Like, I don't think that there's any sort of politician that has 100% of my ideas or 100% of
Yeah.
what I think is right, especially in a two-party system. And I think, yeah, ranked choice voting would be a really great alternative to that. How
Yep.
do we vote on that?
All right.
Okay, I think that's all we have for this week, no?
Yeah.
You have anything else to get off your chest?
No, that's it for me.
That is
That was a
also it
lot.
for me. Yeah,
Are you
that
guys feeling the information overload? Because I know I am. And if you are, you should email us at washedupweekly@gmail.com.
or send us a DM at Washed Up Weekly. We are going to I am going to try to up my social media game. Colin's much better at it than I am. But yeah, follow us so that we can maybe hire a social media manager or something like that who
And
would do
oh,
that.
email us. What is your definition of going viral? How many views do you have to get to be considered viral? Because we both agree that it's 100,000 views would be like semi-viral.
Yeah.
We recently had one go 22,000 views.
Okay, that's what I referenced
And so
earlier
we're
too.
like, it's like semi-viral, but not really. And I don't think we've yet managed to go viral, but
It's like the baby tier of viral.
yeah.
Like if there's like a tier list of virality, I would say like we're like on like ring number one or something like that, you know?
Yeah, so email us with the number. We want to know a value so that when we do hit it,
We're gonna be
we can
like
celebrate.
viral or not celebrate depending on the context.
Yeah.
Okay, I think that's all now. Okay.
Washed
Washed up out.
out.